Barbecue. Hello and welcome to another Boost, Booze, and Barbecue. This is Andy. I have a very special guest with me today, Levi Wait, the Drift Doctor. How are you doing, my friend?
Doing well this evening, doing well.
Thank you so much for doing this. It was a little bit short notice, and I apologize for doing that to you, but I really appreciate you coming in the clutch, so thank you so much. Why do they call you the Drift Doctor?
A few guys in the local scene here just started doing that because they knew that I had a doctorate in chiropractic. I've been racing for a long time, took up drifting in 2009, and a lot of the guys just started calling me the doctor. One of my sponsors, actually, for my wrap, that did my wrap on the wide body kit, they said they do the wrap, but with one stipulation that I couldn't micromanage it. I couldn't stand over their shoulder. So they told me that I could give them something to work with, but then they were going to take it over, and all I had to do was drop my car off and pick it up. So I said, hey, I want it to be green, and I want it something chiropractic-y related. And I picked it up, and it had a massive Drift Doctor logo on it. We just kind of ran with it.
That's fantastic. I love the look of it. And of course, it is an E36 M3 that you drift, right?
Yep.
It looks amazing. You guys have to go out and check that out. You can, of course, find it at facebook.com/driftcolorado. That is your page for that. And then, of course, your clinic, Revolution Chiropractic, and you're right there in Denver, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Well, you know, what's funny is I've actually known you for a while. I don't get to see you very often, but you went to school with my wife. She's also a chiropractor. And the thing that I remember about Levi is him getting a Mini Cooper. And I didn't know you were a car guy. I of course, am a huge car guy. And so the first time I saw you with that car, I was like, oh, sweet, a Mini Cooper. I figured you were a little bit of a car guy. And then 5 minutes into the conversation, you said, yeah, I'm trying to find a Honda motor to swap into it. And I was like, oh, yes, I can get along with this guy. He knows what's going on.
Yeah, and once a car guy, always a car guy. And you tend to flock to those people in strange groups of gathering because then you at least have somebody with something in common to talk to.
It's so true. If you can at least find one at a party, then everything is going to be fine, right?
Right. Yep.
That's been a difficult thing for me when we're going around to these food events, or like last night, we just went to a wine event for the wine industry. It was a wine industry appreciation party, and we got invited along. And talking to people, you know, it's great. It's fine. I can talk wine, but I didn't meet a single car guy or girl there. And so there was definitely this moment of like, I'm kind of out of my element. I can talk for about 10 minutes about wine, then I need to move on to someone who hasn't heard my whole spiel.
Right.
But the car stuff, it flows out.
That for sure.
Yeah. So what do we have going on with Drift Colorado this year?
You know, we just finished wrapping up our season. We do our last event of the year, late September, early October. So we wrap that up. We'll have a few fun events throughout the year. And then for 2019, actually, we're kind of blowing it up. This was the first year that Drift Colorado was 100% self-sustaining without sponsors. So that was huge news for us.
Nice.
We've got some good sponsors hopefully on the line to come in for next season. And we're hosting some fairly large events, some kind of not before done stuff here in Colorado or really anywhere throughout the drifting scene. So of course, you know, drifting is a rolling car show. So we always try and bring the car show aspect into it. And so we're going to be hosting several 2-day events, as well as putting some things together with, you know, bigger prize payouts. That's one of the things that's been lacking from our industry. Without the backing of corporate sponsors, it's hard to get prizes for local and pro-am style events. But we're going to try and pull a couple of them off where we're doing $5,000 payouts, you know, for these grassroots guys, which is huge. I mean, that for most of them, that's their entire annual race budget. So that would be huge.
Oh, and that definitely helps bring out the local talent as well, because you have people that a lot of times, I don't want to speak for Colorado, but in Oregon, I know that there are certain times where the guys that are the good drifters and really should be out there competing, sometimes they don't want to because they just don't want to be part of like the door basher scene. I know is what some of the drift guys around here call it. But with you guys doing the money payout, and especially that kind of money, I mean, like you said, 5,000, that's some pretty serious dough. And so I feel like that's really going to attract a much higher quality of drifter for sure.
Yeah. And you know, it's funny. I took over Drift Colorado in 2015. It's been going in Colorado since the early 2000s. But with drifting, I mean, it was slow growth for a while. And I came into the scene here in 2009, and I never missed an event. Anything that was held here in Colorado, I went to. And it took a leave of absence. 2013 was pretty slow. 2014 was very, very quiet. I think they held one event due to time and financial constraints, really. I approached them in 2015, kind of came to a mutual agreement. They said, hey, you know, we think that you have your heart in the right place, and you're doing this because you want to, not for financial reasons. Like, you really want to grow this for you know, for the sport. I took it over in 2015. You know, I kind of went through and revamped the rules here locally and said, hey, if you want to compete for the cash payouts, which are minimal. I mean, our cash payouts are, you know, under $300 for most of our events for first place. Some of them are in the 500 range right now. But I said, hey, if you want to compete, your car has to be presentable. Like, I'm not going to continue to move forward with that, like you said, that door basher style. We have fun events. We have events that we go out and we do that, but that's not our competition series. And it was amazing. I made a couple of rules. Everybody, I mean, it was like wildfire, man. I had 700 comments on the Facebook post in just a matter of 24 hours of everybody being mad about it. And now, I mean, a short 3 seasons later, I think without question, Colorado could go anywhere in the country and we could have 10 cars that would be the best looking 10 cars at any event we went to.
That really
the
says
local
something.
Guys here like really stepped it up. They kind of accepted the challenge and were like, hey, you know what? If this guy's going to take pride in his car, then so am I. And then it just kind of wildfired, and now everything here is insanely nice.
That's incredible. When you get people who care about their cars, they're going to be much more careful about, again, sorry to use the colloquialism, but bashing doors. And when you have that, it raises the bar. It raises that level for everybody. You know that the guy next to you doesn't want to get his car hit, but you're still trying to get as close to him as you can. And that really ups the game for everybody.
And it has. I mean, our local guys here, so we have Vegas Pro-Am that comes to Colorado once a year. And so these are guys that are trying to make it pro, right? They're going through the Pro-Am series trying to win an FD Pro 2 license so that they can move on to the next level. And it was kind of amusing. They came here 2 years ago, or 3 years ago. They've come here for the last 3 years. And all 3 years, 2 of the 3 podium spots have been a Drift Colorado driver. Like, these guys come in with these huge trailers and big horsepower and big budgets and crazy tires. And then they see that the local group of guys, you know, they don't really give us any credit because we're just the local grassroots guys. And then all of a sudden they're like, so the top 5 qualifiers were all local guys. Like, how did that happen? So, like you said, like the skill set, I think people taking pride in their cars, and then it pushed everybody to a whole nother level. I mean, I've driven several different states and several different events, and I've driven Pro-Am events where the guys on the podium, I mean, no offense to, I won't mention any names, but I was like, wow, I mean, these guys wouldn't even qualify in our top 16 at a local event.
Right. And that happens so often. If you're not a drift person, you don't really understand. And I'm not a drifter, but I've been around it enough to kind of have an idea of what's going on. Right. And so seeing how some of these dudes, they have money behind them, you know, and I'm not going to speculate on where the money comes from, but sometimes you have some very, and again, I don't want to call them mediocre drivers, because to get to that level, you do have to have some skills. But as far as drifters go, they're a little bit middle of the road with their skills, but somehow they've been able to make it kind of beyond where a lot of the other guys that maybe have more skill but not quite so much backing do, if you know what I mean.
Oh, for sure.
And so it is nice that you guys are able to do something. It's not catering to the locals, but it's something that's very accessible.
I think one of the things that you were kind of talking about, there's those guys that have a little bit more backing. And I mean, I know some of these guys are silver spoon kids. Their parents just fund it.
I wasn't going to say that, but yeah.
And I don't hate on that. I mean, if anything, most of us are jealous. Nobody would really turn it down for somebody to give us money, right?
Right.
And then some of them, like I know one particular gentleman is kind of self-made. He's a younger guy, did real well with a clothing company and likes drifting and just got into it and built a ridiculous car out of the gate. I mean, $250,000, $300,000 car. It was a 1,300 horsepower Genesis. Thing was insane. people wanted to hate on him because his car was crazy, but he kind of handicapped himself by going, 0 to 100. He didn't really walk those stairs in that step. And I think that's where a lot of, especially the local guys and just grassroots drivers in general, the guys that had to struggle through, drifting that 140 horsepower car because that's all they could afford. Mm-hmm. And trying to get good at that, well, then all of a sudden now you've got a 160 horsepower car with angle, and then a 200 horsepower car with coilovers, and you make this progression, and now you get to where the local guys are here. I mean, most of us, like upper echelon drifters here, 500 plus horse or 400 plus horse at least, with full race prep, everything. But we came from nothing. We came from drifting naturally aspirated $1,000 cars. Mm-hmm. So our skills improved with our budget, where the guys that come into it with that silver spoon, I mean, they're at a major disadvantage. They've come in and developed a bunch of nasty habits because they had money to overcome those, to use them as crutches, basically.
Exactly. And I don't think that applies just to drifting. I would argue that applies to everything in life. My nephew, we just got him his first car. I shouldn't say we. I kind of pushed him into it, though. He was looking at mid 2000s or 2010, 11, 12 kind of cars in like the $6,000-$7,000 range because he has some money saved up. And I just kept telling him, don't do it, man. Don't make that your first car. Like, you have got to get something that you need to struggle with a little bit. And we finally kind of convinced him. And so we got a Ford Festiva for $600 here a couple weeks ago. Nice. And, I'm very excited to have him drive the thing. He did he was a little hard on the clutch. Let me just put it that way. And it started to slip, and he was like, "Oh no, what's wrong? Is the car totally done?" And I said, no, it's an organic clutch. It's going to be fine. You just have to let it cool off. You need to drive it right. And so we kind of talked about what that means to drive it right. And I think he's slowly falling in love with that little car, which I appreciate because I think it's the perfect learner car. Tons of visibility out the sides, and it's a manual. I think it's very important for everybody to learn how to drive a manual, and drifting is no different. And racing, in my opinion, is no different. Like, if everybody could start in a Miata, I think the world would be a better place.
We were just talking about that the other day. We were at a Hot Import Nights car show. There was a fastback hardtop NA Miata there. I was like, dude, I'm in love with that little car. Like, it's got a special place in my heart. And the guys were kind of teasing me. I was like, dude, I had a supercharged. Do you remember my little NA I had?
Oh, yeah.
So I had that little supercharged hardtop NA, and I was like, dude, that was one of the funnest cars I ever owned. And I said, I don't care if people tease me about it being a chick car. I was like, I used to tell people, I'll give you $100 if you can drive that car around the block and get out without a smile on your face.
And the nice part about that is, even though it was supercharged, you said it was an NA. Was it one of the 1.6s or was it a 1.8?
It was a 1.8. It was a 94.
Okay, so it might have been making 220, 230 horse, I'm assuming?
No, when I dynoed it, it was because it was just a non-intercooled, very simple Jackson Racing kit. I think it made 176 or 179 at the wheels.
Yeah. 7 pounds of boost.
Yeah. I didn't think it was that. I think it was only 6, actually.
6, yeah.
It literally was very basic. It was no power rate house, dude. I would by today's standard, it's a joke. You could go buy a mediocre Civic that would smoke that car in a straight line. It was so neutral and balanced, and you could do drifting events in a parking lot. I mean, it was fun. And
just with that little bit of a horsepower increase, I mean, let's be realistic, that didn't quite double your horsepower, but you probably gained 60 horsepower at the tire, 65 horsepower at the tire after putting that supercharger on. And so just that right there, it changes it into this whole other car. And you're right. Challenge anyone that appreciates cars to jump in that, take it around the block at speed, and not get out with a smile.
I used to tell people all the time, I'm like, they make a spec Miata class. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a reason, because that car is a blast on the track.
And it is the most competitive race class you have out there for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Because you have no power. So there is no crutch. Like, if you screw up, you lost. That's it.
I feel like
it's all driver.
Well, I feel like B-spec cars are starting to come along behind spec Miatas as like another big class. It feels like that's really starting to pick up steam now for the entry level guys. But there's got to be 2-to-1 still drivers in spec Miatas versus B spec, because it's just a quintessential place to start. And, when we talked to Zach Morgan of PRE Racing here a few weeks ago, and of course you can find that episode on boostboostbb.com and Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, SoundCloud, anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We were talking to him about spec Miatas off air. And, he talked about the two different types of people. There are the people that buy a used spec Miata because they just want to get out there and race. And that is the back 2/3 of the pack, right? And then you have the guys that want to get real serious about it and want to try to start winning national level events in spec Miata. And then they're putting some serious money into the motors and some serious money into the high dollar suspension and stuff like that. But if you just want to get out there and mix it up and hone your skills and have fun, you can totally go and just get a $7,000 spec Miata out of season and take it to the track. Now, it's not going to be autocross money. You're not going to spend $50 for a single day event. It's going to be $400, $500, $600, $800 if it's a full weekend event. But still, that's such an entry level compared to these other high dollar cars. You were just talking about the big horsepower drift cars, not the 400, 500 horsepower, but like the 1,300 horsepower, full on built $300,000 race car. Just to run that at a weekend event is going to be in the thousands of dollars.
Oh, dude, insane. And we have that conversation a lot about, guys show up and they see my car and they see there's another gentleman that raced with us, Wes Moya, and like the after hours auto sports cars, and they see these cars that are fully built. And they don't realize that, hey, we've been building them for 10 years. Like, I've been building this car before this kid that's interested in drifting had his driver's license.
Right.
And then, so they think that's the car they need. And I was like, how much money do you make? They're like, oh, I work at AutoZone. And I was like, I mean, that's fine. We all have to have a job, but this kind of car isn't an AutoZone budget kind of car. Even if you could afford to build the car, even if you won the car and I gave you the car, driving a car at the level that I'm at and some of the other guys are at isn't sustainable if you don't have a substantial liquid budget.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was trying to explain to some of these younger guys, like, don't build my car. Get them in a Miata. Get an NB Miata. Buy a 325 BMW, because my annual tire bill is close to 10 grand.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's crazy. I could do cocaine and save myself money.
It's so true. How does that saying go? If you want to keep your kids off of drugs, get them into cars. It's way more expensive. Yeah.
Because, I mean, so we have a lot of us that have the big boy cars also have what we call our Mizzle cars. So they're low horsepower cars that we go out, and that is where we do the door bashing, and we get comfortable getting close to each other. We get comfortable, like, taking a hit and knowing what that feels like and how to respond to it so it doesn't total both cars. And all of us have bone stock power.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have coilovers and an angle kit on a $400 BMW.
That's perfect. That's all you need.
And it's a 325. It makes, I mean, we're probably like 160-ish wheel horse, 150-ish maybe. We put 205 tires on the back that cost $30 a tire, brand new, and we put it at 65 PSI of pressure and drive for half the day on 2 tires.
Mm-hmm.
And develop a lot of skills. And that's the thing we try and push. Like, guys come out and show up and watch our events and want to get into it and think they need to build these insane cars. I was like, no, dude, go buy a cheap car that you can mangle up, because you will,
mm-hmm.
and get something with low enough horsepower you can afford to actually drive it.
Exactly. Because people need to take those maintenance costs into their mind as well. Like, you have to take all that stuff into account. You can't just go, oh, here's what the car costs. Here's some tires. There's going to be maintenance beyond that. You're going to be wearing out your brakes. You're going to be wearing out your wheel bearings. You're going to you might drop a tire and bust a rim. Like, you got to have a little bit of money saved up for that. I see it constantly, and hopefully whoever's listening to this and hears me say this, I'm not talking about you specifically, so don't be offended, but There are tons of guys that go out there and spend serious money on their cars and wide body and angle kit and 22-inch rims and the tires. I have to buy Nankangs because I can't afford Falcons. But at least they're, a 225 that's stretched onto a 10-inch wide rim, stuff like that. And then they go out there for one event and their angle kit breaks because they bought the cheapest one they could find. And now they're sidelined for the entire year because they can't afford to replace it.
Yep. We call those the hot boys.
It just happens so often. I see it so often. I was talking to my cousin Coy the other day, and we were looking at, let's see here, we were looking at Lexus LS 400s, the four-door sedan. And the only downside, the only knock is that they're automatic, But we were looking at those, and it is so easy to find one of those or one of the Infiniti Q45s. And literally, if you just are patient, you shop around, $1,000 or less will get you one of those. And as long as you're not doing anything too crazy to it, you're changing the oil and you're keeping an eye on your spark plugs and stuff like that, they'll run 400,000 miles.
Yep.
And I feel like that would be a really good place for someone to start if they just said, hey, I want to get into drifting. I would want to just say, okay, we're going to buy you one of these. You're going to get the diff welded the correct way. And then we're just going to get you a whole bunch of rims with really narrow, cheap tires on them. And we're just going to go out there and have fun for a year.
Yep. Obviously, we were at that Hot Import Night show here in Denver. Had a pretty decent turnout. I think they had about 15,000 people come through the door for that.
Ooh, nice.
So our booth had a pretty good showing, and we were talking to, handing out stickers and media and getting everybody on our, our Instagram page and whatnot. And we had multiple conversations with guys that really wanted to get into the sport, and that's what we kept saying. The 240s, the Nissan 240s kind of started the sport, but the drift tax has kind of killed those. Like, it's such a hot commodity right now that they're, one that's a decent runner is 3,500, and it's a pile, right? You have to spend half a season undoing what the previous owner did to it.
Exactly.
And I think that, I know that I single-handedly switched the whole drift scene here, that BMWs now outnumber 240s at drift events locally. Because they figured out that, if you were patient, you can buy a running E36 manual for $600.
Yep.
You throw another $500-600 in maintenance on it, you literally can beat that car to death for a full season and it will not stop.
And super balanced. The thing that I love about the E36 is they were produced right during that whole time when the 90s, the mid 90s DTM was really starting to ramp up and the manufacturer races were really ramping up. And so even the bottom of the barrel, like you said, the 323s or the 325s, those cars are very well sorted. Their suspension geometry is very good. The car is very neutral. Like it's a really good all-around car. And if you throw the money into preparing the chassis or the suspension or whatever, and the motor does give up, boom, LS swap it.
Yeah, and and even if you don't have the budget for that, you could pick up another, like those M50s, the 325 motors, they're $300. And they're everywhere because BMW used them for so long. They were mass-produced from 92 all the way into you could use the same block in your car all the way up until 99.
Right.
So there's a billion configurations. They're very well sorted, and now BMW is very well supported in the drift world. So there's tons of aftermarket parts for them. And honest to God, one of the main reasons I built my first BMW, I was actually looking for a Miata or a BMW. I didn't want a 240. But I wanted a Miata or BMW, and it's whichever one showed up for $1,000 first was going to be the winner. And so I bought my 325i, it was an IS, my trusty Rusty, for $1,000, and started building that. Well, in hindsight, it would turn out to be a great idea because all the spec BMW racers and all the SCCA racers and NASA racers, well, those guys had huge budgets to make their E36s insanely fast. Well, that meant you got takeoff parts, high-end, high-quality takeoff parts, but this wasn't coming from a Honda crowd or a 240 crowd where when, a Honda guy, again, no offense to anybody that owns a Honda, just an analogy, but Honda guy buys a set of $600 wheels. When he sells those wheels, he doesn't have a big budget, so he needs to get at least $500 back out of those wheels.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the BMW racing world, these guys are buying $3,000 suspensions. And in 2 seasons, they sell that $3,000 suspension for $300 because they want it out of their trailer.
That's a really good point, Levi. That's
right?
A very good point.
Those guys they're not trying to recoup any cost. They want you to clean it out of their garage.
Exactly. Well,
so when I first started out and I didn't have a budget, having my ties into the BMW world helped me immensely, man. I got stacks of free rims and, they got damaged or the finish was messed up or they couldn't use them because they were too narrow or too wide I just had stacks and stacks and stacks of autocross tires that they just gave me. They're like, oh yeah, I ran 8 laps at Nationals with these tires. You can have them.
Well, they've been heat cycled. They can't do anything with them now.
Right. And I was like, yeah, I'll burn off free tires.
When this is the same reason, I was having not exactly an argument, but a heated discussion, shall I say, with somebody the other day. I think that these BMWs, especially the mid-90s BMWs, late 80s, early 90s, are where the guys building the Lotus 7 clone cars are going to start going to get their donor cars. Because if you think back to the 80s, early 90s with the low-cost 7, the guys that were building those, they would try to go out and find a Corolla GTS. And then those started gaining in popularity. And then they moved on to Miatas. I think some 240s were donors, but not quite as many. It seemed like it jumped straight from the rear-wheel drive Corolla GTS over to Miata. But now that the Miata is getting more and more expensive. A big portion of that,
I think, was the fact that the majority of 240s actually ended up being automatics.
Right. Yes, you are correct. And then with Miatas, of course, getting some kind of a cult collector status these days. I mean, your NAs are worth more than your NBs, and your NBs are worth just about as much as the NCs. We'll see what happens with the NDs, but the nostalgia factor, the cool factor, whatever you want to call it, the early Miatas are really starting to gain in value now, like the 240s were. And so I have been kind of beating this drum for the last couple of years going, hey guys, I know that someone is going to come out with a Lotus 7 kit car that is designed to accept all of the BMW 3 Series stuff. It's going to happen very soon. And I have no doubt that it's already happened or is happening, but that's just the natural progression of things. Like, you're looking for a car that is going to be easy to service, lots of parts available, and has all of the right, well-sorted suspension components. The BMW 3 Series is where it's at.
Yeah, I use this, I kind of jab my friends that are driving 240s. I was like, let's look at this logistically, right? So the E36, all BMWs in general are branded as the ultimate driving machine. And then you joke about, when you think about BMW, you think about its racing heritage and its national championships and where it's been. 240 advertisement, it had a mid-20-year-old woman on
it. Yeah. Yep.
There was a different marketing thing there. And I push a lot of the guys into if they want a 240 because they're in love with the chassis or whatever, like, I want you in a car you're going to love. So do that. If people are open-minded, I was like, Miata is a great starting platform because it's so good to learn on. You get good at drifting that car, I'll give you the keys to my car and you'll look semi-pro.
Mm-hmm.
The BMW is a good keeper car because it can grow with you better than the Miata because you're not so limited to power and breakability. The non-convertible the convertible part makes the Miata hard to move into different arenas.
Exactly.
With it affordably. And the right BMW, if you know how to pick it, E46 is a great chassis, the handling wise, but they're not as strong. So I try and tend to push people away from that if possible. But I took my E36 with 325 axles and 325 diff, not even M3 stuff, all the way into the low 11s at the drag strip. And I was making 400 wheel horse. And It lasted 4 seasons before I finally broke an axle.
That's really impressive.
If you look it up, you can buy drive shaft shop axles, but I don't know anybody that owns them.
Sure, there's not really a point.
Right. The M3 E36 axles that you can buy from anybody on Craigslist for $100 hold 1,000 horsepower.
Whoa.
Like, why wouldn't you want to do that?
So, you know what? That brings me to a good place, Levi. I'm glad you brought that up, because since we're on the topic of BMWs, and since you are knowledgeable about that and I am not so much, what is the BMW hierarchy? Let's stick with E36s just for the sake of simplicity. But if somebody wanted to start at the bottom, moving all the way up to the top, what's kind of the hierarchy that they would or should follow? Is there anything that they should try to stay away from? You know, that sort of thing.
For competitive reasons, or for like driving just to own in general as a good car?
Well, if you're going to be drifting this thing, and it's someone that's learning how to drift, so they may be a little harder on the clutch than normal and that sort of thing.
The E36 is probably one of the strongest overall platforms for durability and affordability right now. The E46s have really plummeted in price, so entry-level price point is easier. I think E36, you're probably still looking, unless you find the crazy deals, and they exist, but I would say on average, you're going to need to spend $1,500 to $3,000 to get a decent E36. E46s have really fallen off, and especially like if you don't mind getting a 325 or a 328 E46 sedan manual. I mean, I literally buy those. I buy one a month in that $400 range, running and driving with the title. I mean, they're not pretty. They don't have great maintenance, but what's happened is the cars came down to a price point where people started buying those at that $3,500 and $4,500 mark because they wanted to be in a BMW. But these were non-car people that bought a BMW that didn't maintain it and couldn't afford somebody else to do it. So the cooling systems failed, or the front control arm bushings totally got worn out to the point where they were non-existent, and the car drove terribly or was unsafe or wore out tires, or the rear axle came out of the boot because the rear trailing arm bushing came loose. Or so then you see these cars that are like, oh, it runs and drives great, but needs a clutch, or runs and drives great, but it overheats, or it runs, all these oxymoron ads that you read. Well, it doesn't run and drive great if it doesn't drive.
Yeah, starts every time, it just immediately dies after. Yeah,
you can, like, I go down and, I just tell these people, I'm like, hey, it's just business for me. Like, I don't need this car. I got $400 cash, and I'll load it on the trailer right now. And they're like, yeah, man, whatever. I need the money to get a new ride or whatever. And I load these cars up, take them home, put a radiator in them, water pump in it. Like, I put just a few $100s in these cars. I'm $800 into a running, driving, reliable car.
That's pretty nuts. But again, not going to be as strong or reliable under track use as the E36.
Yeah, the E36 is going to be the stronger overall car. The motors are stronger, the chassis are lighter, and the rear ends are definitely stronger. The E46, that's kind of the weak link. It's hard to dual purpose an E46 because the only limited slip they made was the M3. However, in the E36, lots of models came with a limited slip, so you could still drift it and still drive it every day.
Interesting.
You could daily a welded diff, but it just sucks.
Oh yeah. No, we all know how bad that is. I'm 100% with you there.
And then E46, the axle shafts are not as strong until you go M3, which are expensive. And when you do welded diff and it slides, once you start to add power and add traction, you'll start breaking axles. And if you manage to solve that issue, the subframe mounting situation in the back where the diff mounts the subframe is a weird single bolt that's really prone to breakage on the E46. So I tend to see more E46s that they're not out for the season like you were talking about earlier, people trying to overbuild their car or build outside of their budget. But I see a lot of E46s that come and drive half the event, and then they don't come back until the next event because they broke something.
Yeah, I gotcha. But the E36, not so much.
Correct.
Now, is the E30 in one of those categories where its value is starting to increase, and so people tend to stay away from those?
Yeah, the E30s, I saw a lot more of those when I started drifting. Not so much anymore because the value of them has gone up so high. They're a pretty solid little platform. I would equate them to a Miata as far as power and skill level goes. Like, it's a great learning platform, but because the E30 has non-adjustable trailing arms, you can't, and even if you weld it in, you can't really get good toe and camber alignment in the back, so you're always going to have tire wear issues. with the E30 that you just don't have with the E36.
I gotcha. What do you attribute that value increase to? Because I feel like with Miatas, there's a lot of nostalgia there and kind of a cool factor. Do you feel like the same thing is going on with the E30?
Yep. I think the E30 is the modern day 2002.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think it's they're still new enough, part availability is enough that people can build them as a quote unquote classic, but still drive it every day.
Sure.
And I think E30s, you see it with all the cars, right? A car hits the bottom point of its value, and then they basically just get wrecked, ruined, crushed, destroyed, scrapped, whatever at that price point until there's so few of them left that now they're starting to come back up in value.
Yes, you're 100% right.
The E30 has definitely done that without question. Like, it's got to the point where finding a clean one sells for a lot. I found a clean one owner 325 IS. It's an 87. It sat in her garage so long that 2 of the struts were frozen, like literally didn't move. It was a terrible drive home. I thought I was going to knock my fillings out and bend the chassis. Got it home. I put new shocks on it. I put new brakes on it. Did a full tune-up. Went through the vacuum lines. Got it running tip-top. It had terrible paint fade. I put new tires on it. I sold that car for $9,500.
Whoa.
I mean, it was like not even a contest. Like, I literally listed it. 2 guys called me, and it was gone the next day because they're getting hard to find clean ones that aren't beat up, that aren't dented up, and that don't have a ton of rust on them.
Mm-hmm. I don't even want to ask you about the M3s because we all know how beautiful the E30 M3s are with that factory wide body. I mean, that's the thing of our childhood dreams. If you were a child of the 90s, a car kid of the 90s, that's definitely one of those bucket list items. And
sure.
The E36 M3, I assume, is not holding value in the same way because it looks almost identical. I won't call it identical, but almost identical to just a regular 3 Series E36, right?
You know, I wouldn't say they've appreciated like the E30 has, for sure. Like a really nice 325, like I said, is in that 7,000 to 10,000 range in the E30s. An M3, I mean, even moderately nice ones are in the 20 plus range.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if they're exceptionally nice, I mean, 40,000 for an E30 M3 is not unreasonable.
It's that nostalgia factor now.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's because people our age, my age and your age, that grew up seeing those cars now have the money to buy one.
Yep.
And there's less of them available, so we're willing to pay for it.
It's the same reason why that, I want to say it was a 94, it was a 94, 95, 96, something like that, Integra Type R, and it had super low miles, 30,000, I think, went across the Barrett-Jackson block here a couple months ago for $63,000.
Yep, I saw it.
When I saw that, I was absolutely blown away, but then it just solidified my mind, like, oh, hang on a second. We're approaching middle age now, so we're supposed to be adults with money, and some of us have done better than others. And boy, if I were one of those people that's doing a lot better than I'm doing now, but I had an affinity for those Integras, yeah, I'd see that thing come across the block and I'd bid it up. Heck yeah.
Oh, for sure. And we're starting to see that in the E36 market now too, where, I mean, there was a 95 M3 coupe on Bring a Trailer that had 210 or 220,000 miles on it. It had the valve train rebuilt, but not a motor rebuild, no trans rebuild. It wasn't, in my opinion, a pristine example of anything. It sold for $11,800.
What?
I was like, I mean, it's kind of crazy where they're going right now. I think the E36 M3 is on the rise for the appreciation if you have the right combination. Combination. I just recently picked up an E36 M3 convertible manual 5-speed. It was a real clean car. I've started restoring it back to OEM specs and I've been driving it for about a year, but I'll end up selling that car. But it's one of 61 ever made. Well, I was trying to go through the VIN registry and look them up. Of the 61, I mean, obviously I can't track them all down, but I found out that like 14 of them don't exist anymore.
Wow.
So there are VIN numbers that are no longer registerable, right? Like they've come back as gone or crushed or abandoned or whatever.
Right. What are you using to track that with? Are you using like VinWiki or something?
So there's, for like cars like the M3, there's actually a registry.
Oh.
That you can go on to.
Well, that makes it handy.
Find. Yeah, oh, for sure. It's got your little VIN decoder, and it's got a registry of all the options and things like that. So you can see your production numbers and whatnot.
Well, I want to take you in a little different direction now. We've been talking a lot about the BMWs, which
sure.
I appreciate. You're very knowledgeable. But I want to look into the future a little bit. Let's say 10 years from now, the E36s have just gotten too expensive, even for your taste. Do you think that there is and I'm going to use air quotes, modern car that's out right now that's good, but you don't see it holding a lot of value? Like, for example, I'm just going to throw this out there. I feel like the Hyundai Genesis is going to continue to decline in value until it bottoms out at the, $1,500 mark. Who knows, maybe lower for the 4-cylinder. And I could foresee that becoming kind of the next E36 M3 or 240 or whatever for the drift community in 10 years. What do you think?
And I agree with you. One of the things that I don't know if it's the Hyundai name. I don't know why that Genesis, especially the Genesis Coupe, I don't understand why that didn't catch on with the 20-somethings.
No, I'm with you. Yeah.
It was a 2-liter turbo that with basic bolt-ons was close to 400 horse, or you could pick the 320 horse V6 manual coupe. Like, aggressive styling, cheap to buy, cheap to maintain. I don't know why they didn't catch on. I do think that you'll see, I'm starting to already see them come in. I've seen a few guys bring them in, and I've seen a few of the 4-door Genesis come in that people have manual swapped.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the manual swaps. Yes, of course. The same thing that we're seeing with the Lexus cars and the Infiniti cars.
Yep. And so I'm starting to see some of those coming in, and I think you're right. I think especially that V6 Genesis Coupe is a phenomenal option. Cars that have really dropped a ton in price, and I'm starting to see quite a bit of drift events, and our great starter dual-purpose platforms are the 350Zs.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've seen several of those with clean titles in the $4,000 to $6,000 range.
And boy, starting out with that
work, but
that VQ motor, man, that's a real good way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I hate the way it sounds, especially a straight pipe VQ. I'd rather you stab me in the eye with a hot poker iron, but.
Yeah, but if you do that, if I stab you in the eye, you still have to hear it. So maybe you should change that to your ears.
That's true. But yeah, I mean, I personally don't like sliding the 350Z. I think they're very lethargic. However, it's one of very few cars that you literally could go buy for $4,000, drive it to the track, and it will drift just like it is.
And all day long. You won't have to worry about it overheating. You won't have to worry about it, maybe a little lifter tick at the end of the day, but do your oil change and she'll be ready to go.
And they slide well. There's a lot of aftermarket support. I see those taking over for sure. There's a mass-produced car and there's a billion of them, and there's tons of them at auctions, salvage cars, wrecked cars, because some kid got it for his 16th birthday and totaled it. So you see a lot of them available. So I can see the 350Z is going to be definitely a huge player in the very near future. And another car that I'm starting to see show up a lot is the FRS and BRZs, for the simple fact that these kids are going and buying them on a loan, making their $214 a month payment, and bringing them to the drift track. Not a great financial move, in my opinion. I mean, the potential of totaling my $30,000 car and still having to make that payment sounds terrible, but it's an entry-level option. I see a lot of guys do it.
I'm 100% with you. The problem I see with the FRS BRZ is that there are going to be a lot of engine swaps, in my opinion, because that new FA motor, I found out from a Subaru tech recently, I didn't actually know this. When you get a gasket kit for that motor, if you're doing a full rebuild, it literally comes with some O-rings and a giant tube of RTV. The entire thing, almost entirely, is RTV, and so it makes it a huge pain to rebuild. So I definitely could see a lot of those cars popping up with blown motors, guys getting them cheap and just swapping an EJ into it.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Because let's face it, boxer style motor has its place, but it's not known. It doesn't have that LS1 reliability behind it. You know what I mean?
Right.
They're cool, they are what they are, but reliability is not their forte, and they're extremely underpowered. And then on the flip side of that, I mean, my guy and Peter McDonald up in South Dakota, he bought his BRZ brand new with the intent of making it a drift car. Like, literally bought a brand new car, took it home, tore the interior and all the glass out, caged it. I mean, it was a full drift car.
Dedication.
When it was 5 months old. But he put that, I don't know what brand turbo kits on it, but he makes like 415 wheel horse. I mean, it's a 14, I think, and he just beats it to death, and it just keeps going. I don't know how. He blows up transmissions like nobody's business, but the motor just stays together, and he's like, I don't do anything. He's like, I change the oil and do maintenance.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I've heard that those FA20s are an incredible motor and that the geometry within them is where Subaru needs to be going with their motor. But, I've just been told that the rebuilds are awful. But yeah, if you can keep the power levels low enough to where you're not throwing a rod or turning your bearings or anything like that. Oh yeah, I'm 100% with you. I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was the guys at Crawford Performance when the BRZ first came out. They said something very similar. They said they just slapped one of their off-the-shelf turbos on it. The FA20 instantly made STI horsepower with the same turbo, and they just didn't have to do anything else to it. It just ran and ran and ran and made tons of horsepower.
Yep, they're not a cheap car, but I see a lot of them coming in because it's a way that somebody doesn't have to shell out $5,000 up front.
Right, exactly.
They can show up with a signature and a little bit of credit and a cosigner and come to the track. Again, not my recommendation, but it's doable.
Well, and if I'm not mistaken, Toyota and Subaru even said flat out that the tires that come on the BRZ and the FRS from the factory are the same ones that come on the Prius because they wanted the car to be tossable, slidable at that low horsepower level. They wanted it to have low limits so that people could be entry level into it and really just have fun with the car exactly the way it sits.
Yeah, they definitely, I mean, they slide well. They're very low on power. So extending turns, it's a car that's going to require a lot of e-braking.
Mm-hmm. It's a car that's going to require you to learn.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Another car that people have been kind of sleeping on, and I actually just picked one up yesterday, is the C5 Corvette.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I picked up a Z06 yesterday for $6,500.
That's a great deal on that car.
I mean, it is a screaming deal, but I mean, those deals exist. I mean, there's a guy here that is building one to drift, and he bought it for $3,500.
Wow!
Had a blown transmission, pulled the tranny out, $600 to rebuild it, put the tranny back in. I mean, he's $4,500 or less into a car with a new clutch and a rebuilt trans.
That's such a good way to go because you've got that T56, which, as long as you're not abusing it too much and you change the gear lube in it, should be a real stout transmission. And then you're going to have an LS1 or an LS2, and we all know what the LS1 or the LS2 is able to do. And then, of course, if you want more power out of it, the options are endless. Absolutely endless.
Yeah, and, I drove his C5, and then I was like, oh, yeah, I need to own one of these. Like, this thing is amazing because the drift kit is a bolt-on angle kit. You don't even have to take off your knuckle. You literally can bolt it on while it's on the car.
Oh, man.
And it doesn't change geometry. It literally just adds more angle.
That's incredible.
So you can drive it to work every day. You could drive it to the road course track and track it. And then the drift kit comes with wheel spacers. So you literally drive to the drift track, take your front tires off, bolt on the wheel spacer, bolt on the same front wheel you had back on it, and now you have drift angle.
That's incredible.
You can just slide it.
You know what? I think you just summarized my question right there with the 350Z, the Genesis, the FRS BRZ, and the C5 Corvette. I mean, if those cars are what we have to look forward to in the grassroots drifting community, then the future is very bright.
Oh, for sure. Dude, I think it's awesome. I love where we're at. I see more E36s at events now than I've ever seen in my life. And I'm at the point where I'm like, yeah, I kind of been there, done that, ready to move on to that next phase of the drift scene. So
Heck yeah.
Started doing something stupid with my C5.
I was about to say that's where the Corvette comes in. Hey, speaking of awesome, by the way, talking to you has been just incredible. So thank you again so much for doing it. Let people know where they can find you if they're out there looking around.
Best place to find us is we do everything on social media. So if you want to find Drift Colorado, that's like you said, it's at facebook.com/Drift Colorado. Our Instagram is drift.colorado. So that's at drift.colorado. And you can find my personal build, my stuff for the Drift Doctor on Instagram at drift_DR, the abbreviation for doctor there. So
that's awesome.
Find out some more there. And if you keep up with the social media on Drift Colorado, we do all kinds of fun stuff, big events, and your Boost, Booze, and Barbecue fits in well because that's what drifting is, right? It's the young man's racing sport. So we party hard in our cars all day, get wild, and then we get the beer out and the booze out and party all night. And everybody brings a grill and hangs out, and then you head home the next day in the morning. It is the culmination of what your show is all about. We just do it on the track.
I love it, man. I love it. That's why I love talking to you guys, and that's why we do what we do. And speaking of Boost, Booze, and Barbecue, you of course can find not just this episode, but all the episodes at boostboozebbq.com, facebook.com/boostboozebbq. The Instagram is at boostboozebbq. Please feel free to go out there and check all that out. Levi, thank you so much, my friend, and I cannot wait to see what 2019 has in store.
Andy, thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Always, my friend. We'll talk to you soon.
Yep.
And once again, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for telling a friend, and we will see you next time. Boost, Booze, and Barbecue.